They have obviously spent millions, if not billions, of dollars building these tunnels. When we think back to the 7th of October, it would seem logical and realistic that actually they appeared from these attack tunnels right on the border of Israel so that they could go and do the massacres that they did in the kibbutzes and elsewhere. I've certainly not seen tunnels like that. I've heard about them and heard them described in Gaza in this sort of fashion. Very sophisticated tunnels. I think somebody earlier on or over the weekend described them almost looking like an underground tunnel, the London Underground tunnel with trains going through them. Some of them are large enough for trucks to drive up and down. Now, the only reason for that must be to move a lot of stuff around the place. I think a lot of us who have not spent time underground doing this sort of thing are surprised by the sophistication. These things have obviously taken a while to build and expense, hugely expensive to do this. And it sort of links into the fact that, Hamas is a very rich organization. Its leaders are sat in great luxury in Gaza. And originally, they got a lot of money from the Iranians. The Iranians have now sort of thrown them under a bus, which is a positive. But I think it just underlines quite a lot what a sophisticated terror organization Hamas is. If it can produce these tunnels of this length, deep underground, and really what we would expect ourselves to build for underground trains in London. To think that it is some small terror organization would be completely to misunderstand the situation. There seems to be no shortage of funding. We know its leaders in Gaza, the 4 or 5 of them individually worth $4 or $5 billion each. We know that huge amounts of financial and military resource has come from Iran and other terror groups. So I don't think anybody is surprised how well funded, how well armed Hamas is. I mean, if anybody needed proof that this was a terror organization who wants to kill every Israeli it sees, has absolutely no regard for the rights and the will of the Palestinian civilians. They have obviously spent millions, if not billions, of dollars building these tunnels. We know that the people they claim to represent, the Palestinian civilians in Gaza, are starving. They don't have proper medical facilities. They want for everything. So, that billions of dollars could be spent on the Palestinian people, and no doubt they'd be in a far better position than they are at the moment. We see a video with the brother of the leader of Hamas in a 4x4 vehicle driving underground, allegedly sort of 50 meters underground in these tunnels several miles long. Now, we understand this particular tunnel is what the Israeli Defense Force term an attack tunnel, and would be appeared to have a load of arms and ammunition stationed there so that Hamas forces could collect them and go out. And this is right on the border with Israel and attack into there. Now, other tunnels, particularly those in the southern part of Gaza, which abut into Egypt, we understand they actually have lorries driving with food and other commodities, but also, of course, weapons. So the ability to move stuff underground in these huge tunnels is phenomenal. But it would appear some are attack tunnels, like the one we're seeing in the video, to be able to allow Hamas to launch into Israel, as they did on the 7th of October, and others are supply tunnels to get food and ammunition and others, across Gaza. We also know that it's where the almost 200 remaining hostages are probably being held deep in tunnels in this labyrinth, which is why, it is proving so difficult to get them out in any means except through negotiation. Certainly now that we've had a good look at this tunnel, the way it's configured, the way it comes up on the border, and from what the Israeli Defense Force are saying, there are areas in the tunnel stocked with weaponry, machine guns, handguns, anti-tank guided weapons, and also ammunition, that it would allow Hamas to get its people together, get the terrorists together, and then fire them out directly into Israel so they could do their evil deeds. This appears to what happened. When we think back to the 7th of October, it would seem logical and realistic that actually they appeared from these attack tunnels right on the border of Israel so that they could go and do the massacres that they did in the kibbutzes and elsewhere. The Israelis have been very clear that they are going to destroy the tunnels. We understand that they're flooding some other tunnels. It makes absolutely sense. But the challenge they've got at the moment is, of course, that they know that Israeli civilians, hostages, are in these tunnels. Actually destroying them, I expect they'll blow up ends. Destroying the whole network would be virtually impossible, but they can certainly render them useless to Hamas in future. And without those tunnels in future, Hamas will find it very much more difficult to operate. It will, of course, mean that once Israel has done that, once they've actually neutralized Hamas, they need to be able to facilitate aid into Gaza another way, because that's where it's coming. But of course, it's got a coastline. There's lots of shipping that could get in there. But yeah, neutralizing the tunnels will be a key part in neutralizing Hamas. We knew, and from the Israelis, that there is a massive underground network of tunnels. The fact that these tunnels have been built, right up to the Israeli border, we know that on the border there's a lot of surveillance equipment, towers, cameras, whatever else. The fact that these have been built so close, I think, really goes back to failing to identify the attack on the 7th of October. It is something that no doubt the Israeli military security services will be looking at very closely. It is also clear that the Prime Minister Netanyahu realizes that they absolutely dropped the ball on this. And in a way, that's why I expect Netanyahu in particular is trying to prosecute this operation to rescue the hostages and neutralize Hamas in such a violent way. But yeah, it is absolutely systematic of the Israeli sort of gaps in their intelligence that allowed this all to kick off. Ben Wallace, the former defense secretary, really suggesting that Israel needs to look at how it's conducting this war. Now, the Americans are suggesting they should do more special forces raids. I think we have seen with these tunnels and everything else quite how complex and quite how challenging this is. I agree with Ben Wallace that probably the best way to save the hostages is through some sort of negotiation. And then secondly, writing down Hamas. If they've got young soldiers who are shooting, surrendering Israeli hostages, that is absolutely the last thing they need. So with the hostages recovered, certainly our experience in Afghanistan and Iraq, where special forces operations very much targeted to take out terror cells, it might take a little bit longer than the Israelis like, but I'm sure if they take a few months to neutralize Hamas and keep civilian casualties to an absolute minimum, then in the longer term, that is of more benefit to Israel than cracking on as it is at the moment. So I think Ben Wallace is talking a lot of sense. Let's hope people are listening. We know the Americans are really the only ones who can try and make Israel listen. And I'm sure, if the Americans manage to persuade Israel to focus on special forces operations, then the Americans are going to need to help themselves, particularly with their intelligence gathering, so that Israel can be precise and take out the Hamas terrorists without taking out Palestinian civilians.